All right, thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be talking to you about dividing decimals, and a couple of key things we need to know about that are just some terms like evaluate, which is simply to find the value of an algebraic or numerical expression. Algebraic, just including variables; numeric, just including numbers only. An expression, a mathematical phrase that contains numbers, operations, and or variables. And you can see some examples here at the bottom of some expressions. As you can see, some have no variables in them and some have variables in them. And then finally, one of the more important ones here, since we are dividing, is quotient, the answer to a division problem. You'll hear that term used quite often. So let's go ahead and take a look at some examples. The first one here, we're simply going to divide 4.68 divided by 9. When the problem is set up in this way, as you can see at the bottom, the first number in the division problem goes underneath the division sign. That is important because the order in division problems matters. So that second number then will go outside, like so. When dividing decimals like this, you need to make sure that the decimal underneath the division sign goes directly up into your solution, where your solution will go. And then you try to first divide the number outside into the first digit. In this case, that would be 4. 9 can't go into 4 evenly, and it can't go into 4 at all because 4 is smaller. So you have to then move to the second number, which would be 6. So we're looking at 9 into 46. 9 can go into 46. It can go in 5 times. Now, since when we're dividing here, that second digit is what we're using, you will put the 5 above that number. So 9 into 46, the 5 will go above the 6 because that is the last number that was a part of what we divided into. So 5 times 9 now gives us 45. And we subtract 46 minus 45. That's going to give us a remainder of 1. Since we still have an 8 out here, we need to bring that down and continue dividing. Now we will divide 9 into 18. 9 goes into 18 evenly 2 times. 2 times 9, you can continue that part of the division and see that you will then end up with no remainder because 18 minus 18 is going to give you 0. So your final answer here, I'll write it a bit more legibly, would be 0.52, and in some cases you will see it written as 0.52. They sometimes use the 0 to hold the ones place. The next example here, we're going to be doing something similar. You'll notice the difference in this problem, however, is that now both values have a decimal. As you can see at the bottom, it says, remember, you cannot divide by a decimal. You cannot divide by a decimal. It has to be a whole number. So in this case, 2.2, we can't divide by that until we modify it or change it. So the way we're going to do that is setting it up the same exact way. 2.2 into 13.2, excuse me. And the way that we change this is we make that number outside the division sign, this number right here, a whole number. And to make it a whole number, it requires you to move your decimal. You need to move the decimal to the right in this case. So you're going to move that decimal in 2.2 one place to the right, because notice when you do that, the number will change to 22. 22 is a whole number, and again, just a reminder, a whole number is simply a counting number, like 1, 2, 3, no decimals. So you're looking at 22 now that you can divide into 13. But now, because we modified 22 before we do the division, we have to also move the decimal underneath the division sign. You can't just modify one part of a problem. If you're going to change any part of a problem, something else will need to be changed as well. And in this case, it's going to be 13.2. We will move the decimal underneath the division sign the exact number of places that we moved the decimal outside the division sign. So it was here. Now it's going to move one place to create 132. So I'll go ahead and finish that off up here. And now we're ready to divide. 22 divided into 132. So looking at this problem, we can see right away that 22 can't go into 1 it can't go into 13, so we're going to need to figure out how many times it goes into 132. Some of you may be able to do that in your head. Some of you may need to do a little trial and error off to the side, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's better to be sure. So 22 goes into 132. I would use maybe 4 or 5 to begin with. So if you're not sure, you have to multiply off to the side. Let's just try 4. 22 times 4 is 88. You can see that 88 is quite a bit lower than 132, so most likely it's a number around 5 or 6. Let's jump 5 and move directly to 6 to see where we end up. 22 times 6 is going to give us 12, carry the 1, 132. Bingo, we figured it out because 22 goes into 132 6 times evenly. So as we continue our division here, 6 times 2 is 12. 6 times 2 is 12 again. You have to remember to carry your 1 on that first multiplication, as you see here. And that's how you're going to end up with your 13. So now you're going to subtract, and you can see you get a remainder of 0. A lot of little pieces to these problems, and the main piece to remember there is to set up the problem correctly with no decimal outside that division sign. All right, the next example here is going to be more of what we call an expression. Once you learn a concept, they're typically going to take that same concept and include unknowns or variables. In this case, x divided by 0.26. They give you the value here, as you can see, 6.344, to fill in for x. So down here at the bottom where it says, remember, use substitution and then divide. That's what substitution is. Substitution means to put in the place of. So in this case, we're going to put 6.344 in the place of x. And this is what the problem would then look like. 6.344 divided by 0.26. So we're going to take that problem now and solve it out. Now again, in order to do that, we need a whole number. So let's first look at how it would be set up with the division sign, as you typically will solve it. And you can see that we don't have our whole number outside. We need to go ahead and modify that. So again, we're going to move that decimal 2 places this time, because if we only move it 1 place, that becomes 2.6. We need to move it 2 places to get rid of that decimal altogether. If we move it 2 places, it becomes 26. So just as we did on the outside here, we need to also do that on the inside. Move it the same number of places. That's going to make that number then 634.4 if we move it 4 places, or 2 places. And then we begin dividing. 26 can't go into 6, but 26 can go into 63. Okay, 26 goes into 63. Again, if you're not sure how many times, you kind of have to do a little side math. 26 times 2 is going to end up, I'll go ahead and help you there, being 52. 26 times 2 is going to be 52. All right, so that's probably going to be the one we're going to go with, being that it's pretty close. So that's going to be 2 there. Again, remember to put the 2 directly above the last digit that you divided into, in this case the 3. We just found out that 26 times 2 is 52. So we're ready to subtract then. 63 minus 52 is going to be 11. We need to go ahead and then bring down a 4 and figure out how many times 26 goes into 114. All right, again, since 26 times 2 is 52, we can kind of estimate that it's probably going to be around 4 or 5 times. All right, 26 times 4 is going to give you 104. All right, that's going to be the one we're going to deal with then. So 26 goes into 114 4 times. And as we just found out, that gives us 104. And we're ready to subtract. And you can see that after we bring our 4 down, we get a familiar number, 104. So we already know then at that point that we need to go ahead and use 4. Now, one thing I didn't regret to mention is we forgot to move our decimal up. Don't forget to move your decimal directly up above where it is underneath the division sign. All right, so we would have 24.4 now. 4 times 26, as we already found out, is 104. And after you subtract there, quite a long problem, but it works out nicely for us to give us 0. All right, your next example will now be word problems. We know how much you guys love word problems. In this one, we're trying to save some money for some new goals, $25.25 a week. Each goal costs $850.75. We're trying to determine how long we would have to save in order to be able to purchase these one goal for the team. So in this case, we have to use division. Why we know we have to use division is because we have a total amount that we're trying to divide into a number of weeks. In this case, it would be $850.75, which is our total amount that we need to divide up into a number of weeks. Well, we don't know exactly how many weeks it will take. However, we do know how much we're saving. So we're going to see by dividing by how much we're saving per week how that'll work out. We're saving 20. So there's your setup. So we can now take that, modify it to help us divide out. So in this case, I'm going to use, like here, we're going to set it up as 25.25 and 850.75. Whoops. All right. And we have to make some modifications just as before. Those modifications need to be made, or changes, to the number outside the decimal, the division sign, so that we can get rid of the decimal. 25.25 is not a whole number, it's a decimal. So we need to move that decimal, in this case, 2 places again, just like the last problem, because moving it once would be 252.5. So we need to move it twice to make it 2,525. And then we will do the same to 850.75. We're going to move that 2 places, the same number of places you move the decimal outside, and that's going to give you 850.75. In this case, we would read that as 85,075. Okay? So now let me clear that off because we got some division to do. 25 into 85075. All right, so now we're ready to divide. So yes, we have our work cut out for us, but we can see that we have the furthest number that we need to divide into at this point. 2,525 is not going to go into 850, which would take us to the 0. However, it will divide into 8,507. We just need to figure out how many times. Well, again, we can use rough estimation here. We know that 2 times 2 is 4. All right, we know that 3 times 2 is 6. So because 2,525 starts with a 2, we can kind of use that to gauge how many times we're going to divide in. So at this point, if we use that estimation, we might try 3 times, because we know 4 would probably take us over, because 4 times 2 is 8. So that estimation will allow us then to put a 3, and again, notice I'm putting it directly above the 7 because that is the furthest number that I'm dividing into. So now we need to do some multiplication. You start by multiplying 3 times the 5, which is going to give us 15, so that we just put a 5 under the 7. Carry your 1. 3 times 2 is 6. We're going to add that 1, which gives us 7. All right, and we're going to do then 3 times 15, or excuse me, 3 times 5 again, which gives us 15. All right, carry the 1 again. And finally, 3 times 2, which is 6, plus 1 is 7. It looks like we made a good choice there. So now we're ready to subtract. 7 minus 5 is 2. We're going to have to borrow here because 0 minus 7 we can't do without modifying it. So we're going to borrow, which would make that 5 a 4. And that 0 a 10. 10 minus 7 is going to give us 3. And we have another issue because 4, we can't do 4 minus 5. So we're going to have to borrow again from the 8, which would make that a 7. and the 4 of 14. I know that's difficult to see, so that's 14 minus 5, which is going to give you 9. And 7 minus 7, which is 0. So lastly, we're going to go ahead and bring down that 5. All right, and because 3 times 2,525 gave us what it gave us, 7575, let's go ahead and assume then that it's going to be 4 that will give us our next value. So we'll go ahead and multiply that out. 4 times 5 is 20. We're going to have to carry a 2. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 2 is 10. 4 times 5 is 20, plus 1 is 21. So you're going to have to carry a 2 there. And then 4 times 2 is 8, plus 2 is 10. So actually, in this case, it was a bad choice. You can see that we went over. And when that happens, what that means is you have to go back and retry it with your other value. So let's retrace our steps here. And go back and use our initial value. Whoops, went a little far there. Of 3. All right, but good news is we already know what that gives us, and that's 75, 75. So we can go ahead and subtract, and that's going to give us 0. We're going to need to borrow at 2 minus 7, which would make that 3 a 2. 12 minus 7 gives us 5. We're going to need to borrow for the 2, which makes that an 8. 12 minus 5 is 7. And we get 1750 as our remainder. Now at this point, depending on what your teacher would want from you, again, you can continue to divide, or you can know it's approximately 33 weeks. If you're going to continue to divide, you would have to include a decimal and add a 0, which would put a decimal here for your solution, which would mean you would have a partial week in there. You bring that 0 down, and you would continue dividing. All right, 25 into 17,500 at this point. That's going to go in probably about 5 times. And again, if you're not sure, what you have to do is some side multiplication. 25, 25. We know that 3 gave us 75, 75. 4 gave us something in the 10,000 range. So let's try 5. Let's see what that gives us. 5 times 5 gives us 25. You're going to carry your 2. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. Carry your 1. 5 times 5 is 25, plus 1 is 26. And then finally, 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. So it gave us 12, 6, 25. It looks like we might be able to go one more time there to 6. However, since we know that this number is going to end up being 5 or greater, we can go ahead and either round up to say approximately 34 weeks, or we can just keep it at 33 weeks. At this point, there's really no reason to continue to dividing, because the question here is how many weeks will he have to save to purchase one goal for his team, and we kind of already know that. It's going to be at least 33 weeks, maximum 34 weeks. So depending again on what your teacher wants from you, you can continue to divide this all the way out and get your remainder, or you can stop there. But you do have the solution at this point, and that would be 34 weeks, because it would be 33 plus an extra 0.6 of a week. Okay, so we know he's going to have to save for at least 34 weeks before he can actually have enough money to 34 whole weeks before he has enough money. All right, let's look at the next problem here. Another popular problem again is determining how many miles per gallon a car can get. And again, this is a useful little problem for real life once you're able to drive. Again, the setup here is the mileage over the gallons. And again, if you think about it, we say miles per gallon. So you can see in just that little piece of information, miles over gallons, that helps you then to determine how to set the problem up. 650.32 divided by 15.4 would be your setup. So again, 15.4 goes outside the division sign, 650.32 would go inside. And you're all set up and ready to divide. So we're going to move our decimal, because you can see we have a decimal outside the division sign, one place to the right, because that would give us 154. And we'll also move the decimal inside the exact number of places. Make sure it's the exact number of places. Don't move it twice just because you want to make that a whole number. It's one place. So your setup then at this point becomes 154 into 6,503.2. And then it's off and dividing. So based off of what we've been doing, again, you can use your rules of estimation. It looks like approximately 4 can go into that, because we know that 6 can't go into it. We know that 5 is probably going to be a bit much. So again, you can always go off to the side, do a little side math if need be, just to be safe before you start multiplying. We'll try 4. That's going to be 4 times 4 is 16, carry your 1. 4 times 5 is 20, and that's going to give you 21, excuse me. And then 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2 is 6. And you can see we get 616, which works out. And we're ready to then subtract. So we're going to put, again, move your decimal straight up. The 4 that we just found goes by the 0, above the 0, because 0 is the last number we divided into. Now we're ready to subtract. 650 minus 616. So again, a little borrowing here, which would make the 5 a 4 and make the 0 a 10. 10 minus 6 is 4. 4 minus 1 is 3. And 6 minus 6 is 0. So we need to go ahead now and bring down that 3. 154 can go into 343 how many times? And it looks as though that's only going to go in once. Well, let's double check here. If we're not sure, we can always multiply it out. Let's see how many times it is with 2. So we go ahead and set it up as 154 times 2. That's going to give you 8. 2 times 5 is 10. Carry your 1. And 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. Oh, I stand corrected. So 154 goes into 343 2 times, which gave us 308. Alright, so we're ready to subtract now. We're going to have to start by borrowing, which would make the 4 a 3 and the 3 a 13. 13 minus 8 is 5. 3 minus 0 is 3. And we now go ahead and bring down our final value here of 2. And we see how many times 154 can go into 352. Well, the good news is we already know. It's going to go in 2 times. 2 times 154 we already know is 308. And then subtract. So at this point, we know, again, approximately to the 10th digit, that Olivia's car will get 42.2 miles per gallon. But again, pay attention to the problem. This does not specify how many decimal places to go out to. If they say go out to the 10th place, you have your answer of 42.2. If it says to go out to the 100th place, you would have to continue to divide. To continue to divide, again, do your subtraction. And have to borrow here. 12 minus 8 is 4. 4 minus 0 is 4. And you can see then you would have to include a 0 and continue your division from there using the same steps as above. In a lot of cases, they will also say round to the nearest whole number. The whole number in this case would be this 2 right here. Alright, so that would mean that her car gets 42 miles to the gallon. Okay, and again, to the 10th place would be 42.2 per gallon. And that concludes the division of decimals.